How is this going? No, this way. Okay. Yeah. I don't deserve my bachelor's. Okay. Is it okay? Yeah. Perfect. So we are just about to start. Isn't it light too loud? Or can this be adjusted? Yes. Okay, perfect. Yeah. Good. So, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming here. We're about to start the fourth event called Breaking Down Borders in Research. This is organized by the Spanish Association of Researchers in Denmark. And this could not be possible without, first of all, our panelists, 4 of them here. Thank you all for coming. And of course, this is only possible because of all the hard work of all the volunteers within the association. So, I don't want to extend myself because I tend to start talking, and I can I can take all the time, and this is not about me or the association, it's especially about dissemination. Okay, so I'm going to give you just a brief summary of the association. So, what we do. Everything starts because we are mainly a bridge between Spain and Denmark. So we are all, most of us, researchers, engineers, many kinds of profiles. And we work in Denmark, but we also have some roots in Spain. And we try to build some bridge between Spanish and Danish society. Then we put our main focus in scientific events. So everything it's about to disseminate. We do a lot of science, but we want to communicate this science somehow. Third of all, we try to do some science policy and try to inform and bring all the good science that we do to the society and to the governments. But I mean, I think what we are on top of everything is just a social community. And if we take a look to some of our pictures, I think this is the one that represents the best what we do. So we are just a bunch of guys that we try to meet, have a drink together, and talk. Just for the sake of knowing, get to know each other. So I'm going to give you just a few words about why we organize these kind of events. Communicating science takes time, right? So as a researcher in a university or a research center or working just at the university, why would you do that, right? It takes a lot of time. So first of all, we want to inspire critical thinking. I think this is key. It's the main point. We need to inform about what we do and also try to teach what we do to empower people. This is just an example. I will give you some. And this is based on real facts. Okay, so FBI and CIA, they hire mentalists to remotely see in the bunkers. So what a waste of public money, right? Second, we need to, it's about to stem the flow of bad information. Of course, COVID and vaccines is a good example, but I really like this one. I think most of us, we know the show called CSI, And that really had an effect on many trials, because all of a sudden, there were a lot of expectations that police, they could just resolve effortlessly most of the cases. Or maybe, I don't know if you remember that thing with enhancing a picture to the last pixel. That makes no sense in reality, but somehow it's really deep into many minds, and that's why we need to inform about the reality and also bring some good sense. And finally, we need to inform public policy. So this is also another example that in October of 2011, they voted. That was in a capital. This was a real voting. And everybody voted against fluoride in the water supply. We need to fight this, right? And we can only do this just by explaining what we do and try to always do this with the right course, with simple terms, but always inspiring. So science cannot promise to provide all the answers, but it's just a method to refine our intuitions. That's it. Thanks for listening. And I'm gonna give the floor to Laura Garcia. She is the consul of the Spanish embassy. She is, of course, one of our main collaborators and sponsors. And the floor is yours. Let me just, I will put this one. Oops.
You're handing me over the... Oh. Let's see how diplomats do this with regard to... Okay. There? Yeah? It's looking good? Okay. So, on behalf of the Embassy of Spain, I am very, very happy to take part in today's event, Breaking Down Borders, organized by the Association of Spanish Scientists in Denmark. Science diplomacy has become an increasingly important part of Spanish foreign policy. Its main objective is to improve international relations through the exchange of scientific and technological capabilities. In this sense, different actors beyond the embassy actively participate in it, such as researchers, professors, scientists, working or collaborating outside their countries. This is why we are always proud to take part in the events organized by them. This year, the Association of Spanish Scientists in Denmark has brought us together to discuss mental health, a topic particularly relevant after the pandemic of COVID-19 that we have suffered these last 2 years. We are aware that taking actively part in the association and organizing events such as this one requires time and dedication during the limited leisure time that young Spanish researchers and scientists living in this country have, and we thank you and we congratulate you for it. In a rapidly changing world where global challenges affect all countries, science, technology, and innovation are one of the engines of social and economic progress. They constitute important drivers of economic development and are essential in shaping our future. The capacity to generate scientific and technological advances, to innovate, to attract talent, are at the core of our science diplomacy. We need you, we need science, we need technology, we need innovation to solve the most pressing challenges that globalization presents us with, such as climate change, pandemics, natural disasters, nuclear proliferation, cybersecurity, among many others, but also to achieve long-term sustainable development in accordance with the Sustainable Development Goals of the 2030 Agenda that you all know, including water and food security. Since 2012, Spain has actively worked in this area. Science diplomacy has gained visibility resulting from the collaboration between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is mine, and the Ministry of Science through the Spanish Foundation of Science and Technology, the FECIT. We work to reinforce interaction between countries, communities, and societies through scientific cooperation. There are already 19 associations such as yours of Spanish scientists worldwide, created by civil society with the aim of making the work of Spanish scientists visible and promoting scientific collaboration with strategic countries. Our Ministry of Foreign Affairs referred to them, stating their growing relevance contributes to giving prestige and visibility to Spain as a country of scientific excellence and to bringing science closer to society. Since RAICEX, the network of associations of Spanish scientists abroad, emerged in 2018, it seeks to bring together these associations under a common framework. We also celebrate the annual meeting of Spanish scientific, technological, and innovative diplomacy, aimed at promoting, among governmental and non-governmental agents, an environment for common reflection on Spanish common foreign policy in this field and establish lines of international collaboration. Last year, the 6th edition focused on connecting the foreign RD&I network with representatives of civil society to hold joint activities and exchange good practices between countries. In order to achieve these, some concrete advances have been made, such as the increase in budget line allocated to scientific diplomacy or the scholarship program for scientific, technological, and innovation diplomacy of the Spanish Cooperation and Development Agency, IFID. Finally, the Spanish Ministry of Science publishes a compilation of brochures and publications that includes forecasts and job announcements from dozens of Spanish scientific institutions called the Science in Spain collection. But all this wouldn't be much without the effort and participation of you, of all of you, the scientists, the researchers, and the professionals themselves. Denmark is a pole of attraction for young Spanish researchers who seek education in Danish universities and then successfully move on to the local labor market. The international exchange and mobility of teaching and research staff and students, as well as the implementation of inter-university networks for the production of knowledge, generates continuous international links. On Friday, at the annual event at DTU, its academic council gave the degree Doctor Technices Honoris Causa to Professor Víctor de Lorenzo from Centro Nacional de Biotecnología in Madrid. I would like to acknowledge here this important recognition and pay tribute, and the tribute his Danish colleagues paid him too. During the celebration, I spoke to several CEOs of medical and biotech companies operating in Denmark who told me that their best researchers were Spanish. This is an impressive achievement. It is a fair recognition of your talent, and you are inspiring to all of us. So I can only congratulate you again and ask you to keep helping the world moving forward with your work. And of course, wish you a very fruitful work today and meeting. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, let's get started. Hi everyone, my name is Gerardo Sanchez, and I work for the European Environment Agency, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here to talk about mental health research. First, a little bit about myself. I'm in Denmark because I'm married to a Danish person, almost like every other Spaniard. But I also came here for science. When I first came here, I worked for the Danish Technical University. doing research on the health impacts of climate change, so talking about like global crisis. And what we're going to talk about today is every bit as serious and every bit as important. Let me see, how do I switch the presentation, Enrique? The topic we're going to talk about is something that the magnitude of it, sheer magnitude of it, is not known by many people. And that's what I wanted to use to set the frame here. Why it matters, why mental health research matters. And the first thing that I want to raise your attention to is because consider the alternatives if there's no mental health research, right? So what you see there is two approaches that were done. I mean, they were supposed to cure mental health issues with no prior research whatsoever and no ethics for that matter, right? So one of them is that trepanation there, that lobotomy that was done directly with a needle into the brain with very poor results. I mean, admittedly, it did work in some cases, but very, very few, very, very poor results, and the consequences were devastating. And what you see in the other picture is a treatment with heat. At some point in the early 20th century, many practitioners, mind you, not researchers, practitioners, felt that heat was a cure for everything, right? And so infectious diseases were treated with heat, inducing fever, sometimes infecting people with malaria, or sometimes by applying steam. Of course, a number of people died on account of that. And you can imagine that their mental health issues didn't get any better, right? So those things do matter. Also, mental health is not just mental health. It makes many of the patients, their families, societies, miserable. And it kills people, right? I mean, when people die, usually they do so from like the immediate cause, like cardiorespiratory failure, but the underlying cause is oftentimes mental and behavioral disorders, right? The burden of disease is associated to it, and it's a very heavy burden of disease, right? So I'd like to see a show of hands of whether the mortality from mental and behavioral diseases in Denmark is above the average of the EU. Who thinks so here? A few people, right? What about Spain? Do you think that Spain is above the EU in terms of mortality from mental health research? Sorry, from mental health disease? So it turns out that both are above the EU average, right? So the EU average is around 37 as in standardized rate. And both Spain and Denmark are above, and that's not uncommon. Mental health issues, as I said, represent a huge burden. First on patients, because without effective treatment, mental health problems have devastating effects on people's health and people's well-being. And so one of the things that can happen is simply that it increases dramatically the risk of suicide. I mean, depending on the diagnosis, up to 50 times more likely to commit suicide or more. So suicide is to a very large extent a mental health problem. It can also have a number of other health effects, and one that is very clearly proven now is the health effect on cardiovascular health, right? So it's not only the mental health itself issue that causes the misery, it's the other accompanying health impacts. It's also incredibly heavy on families, right? So schizophrenia, for instance, it can have devastating effects for families, including trauma, lack of personal and social resources, uncertainty, family disruption, conflict, actual violence, stigma. The stigma and mental health is still brutal across societies, also in Western Europe. So it's devastating on families. Also on healthcare systems, where 13.5% of all hospital beds in the EU are psychiatric care beds. Think about that number. Think about all the diseases and groups of diseases that exist, and the fact that 13.5% are dedicated to mental and behavioral issues. That's absolutely huge. And it also has a huge impact on society, where this used to be a little bit different, this estimate. It was, I think, I seem to recall, it was 1 in 3 people experiencing a mental illness in their lifetime. But it turns out it was not actually very well categorized, and it's more like 1 in 2 people experiencing mental illness, as in like an actual diagnosis in their lifetime. It is also incredibly costly. It costs the world economy that number, which I don't know how many truckloads of bank bills that is, but it's like a humongous amount of money. And it's not only the cost of treatment. This is very important to understand. When thinking about the cost of a disease, it's not only how much your disease is costing to society, but how much you are not achieving yourself. Your welfare and your well-being also has a price. And if you are sick and you cannot work, you cannot produce, you cannot contribute to society. And we all believe that there's an inherent loss of economic welfare to people being sick. So it is a very, very high cost. Now, in 2017, over 48,000 people died of suicide across Europe. People with depression have a 50 times greater rate of suicide, and this is one of those issues where there's a very clear gender disparity. Men are much, much, much more likely to kill themselves in the EU and beyond than women. And that, to a large extent, had to do with a number of behavioral issues, issues related to substance abuse, to alcohol, and with coping mechanisms which are systematically different in men and in women, so also a cultural element. But that's the reality. And it's a reality that is seldom acknowledged, but that's also because the debate on suicide is almost non-existent. It's something that we simply don't want to talk about, but it can be prevented to a large extent. And then the pandemic hit, right? So all of this was happening before, all those numbers were prior to the pandemic. And then the pandemic hit, and with it, all the lockdowns, all the restrictions, all the distance education, whatever it could happen, all the isolation, and then the numbers just simply bounced incredibly. Though you see there estimates of anxiety, prevalence of anxiety and symptoms, as well as depression, and you rarely see in public health those kind of increases. Those are absolutely spectacular increases in numbers, and so you also need to take into account that even though this is to some extent self-reported, it was done in exactly the same way and with the same surveys in the original numbers. So it's fairly credible, those increases. That doesn't mean that they are permanent, but that's an incredible increase, and it's a veritable tsunami of mental health issues that started happening during and after the pandemic. According to WHO, for whom I worked for over 10 years, and can never be accused of exaggerating, that's something I can tell you, it's like inherently conservative organization, right? It may have led to a 27.6% increase in cases of major depressive disorder, MDD, and over 25% in anxiety disorders worldwide, with greater increases in places highly affected by COVID-19, mainly through the lockdowns and the restrictions imposed. Females were more affected than males, another gender disparity. Younger people and age 20-24, vulnerability there on account of age. And also, this is important to note, we are not nearly as certain in terms of treatments and the kind of things that need to be done for younger people. So there's a little bit of a knowledge gap there in terms of these kind of disorders happening in much younger people. Low and middle income countries were also majorly affected. And to a large extent, of course, that also had to do with what happened around the pandemic, not necessarily the pandemic itself. One crucial thing that happened was a disruption of the mental health services. There was a lot of people who were under treatment or receiving services, oftentimes people who could not afford necessarily treatments that were not like the basic publicly provided ones, and their treatment was disrupted, and that worsened a lot of their symptoms. A lot of people could have avoided developing a more serious illness if they had had access to preventive care, but it didn't happen either. So all of that disruption of the health services contributed to an increase in the prevalence and severity of mental health issues. There were a lot of suicides. It's always difficult to attribute a suicide to a specific cause, like an adverse life event, but of course, like when you see the pandemic, the lockdowns happening, and then a wave of suicides, is not difficult to make the connection. Epidemiology will have to reflect upon how that connection was made. Very important too, a major mental health impact on healthcare professionals themselves, who were under huge pressure and feeling powerless against a pandemic. And then they also had to work beyond their human limits, and they had to stretch themselves so incredibly thin, oftentimes to no avail. And of course, children's mental health and well-being, as I said, this is something incredibly scary because there's not much we have in terms of precedents about the mental health of children under these kind of conditions. And many more things. And so that's why mental health research matters, right? Because it was a huge problem that just got even bigger. And because we want to make sure that every intervention is based on the best available evidence, not prejudice, not opinions, not politics, but evidence. So here are some priorities in mental health research. I chose this particular list because all of them were more or less the same. I mean, it's like so incredibly self-evident for the people working here. So of course, like one of the crucial ones is prevention, mental health promotion and interventions, the causal mechanisms, sharing information, data sharing, scientific and technological advances, reducing stigma and empowering patients and their families as well, and establishing systems. And today, we're going to be touching upon prevention on one hand, the causal mechanisms from the very, very detailed to the translation from the laboratory to actual treatments and the technological advances thereon. We have 3 experts today. These experts are truly top-notch. We're going to start with a talk from Dr. Alfonso Buil, who's a geneticist and a computer scientist working on statistical genetics and genomics in a hospital setting here in Denmark. And his research aims to understand the etiology of complex traits, and in lay terms, at making the connections between genes and mental health. He's part of the ISEEK initiative that puts together genetic data and medical records for a lot of patients. It's important to note that here in Denmark and the Nordic countries, there's one of the best situations in the world concerning databases and database maintenance. And this kind of information is a paradise for epidemiologists. It's very well known. Afterwards, we're going to have Dr. Santiago Mora, who's a postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Neuroscience of Copenhagen University. And he's going to talk about neuropsychiatric disease and preclinical animal models. So you see how we're sort of like going down the ladder to actionable treatments. And afterwards, we're going to have Tonina Ferrer, who's a psychologist, coach, and artist and scriptwriter, and specializes in well-being and specifically on migration and mental health. So she's going to talk about migration, a journey through its different stages, and emotional management. So I think that's all I wanted to say. For now, let's hear the experts. Remember, we're going from the most specific to possible applications, and then to the actual reality of dealing with mental health issues of the people. So let's hear the experts. Alfonso, the floor is yours.
Ok. ¿Me ayudas con esto? Okay. So thanks a lot for the introduction, Gerardo. And thank you all for being here. So yeah, I'm Alfonso Will. I work here. This is the Institute of Biological Psychiatry. It's in Roskilde. And our goal is exactly that, is to try to find some biology related with psychiatry. And today I'm going to talk about three things, more or less, three ideas. I'm going to talk a bit about this precision medicine, why is that difficult in psychiatry. I'm going to talk a bit about the genetics of mental disorders and see what we can do with that, if we can do anything. And then just getting a bit the line of the last comment of Gerardo, I will also explain why it's so nice to work in this kind of problems here in Denmark. So precision medicine, what it is something that is very hot in the last years as a medical topic, but it's also a political topic. And in a way, the political kind of starting point was already like 7 years ago when this US had even this kind of engagement in trying to provide this, I think the key is this individualized care. So it's this idea of trying to go to the treating the population. Can we use all the technological advances and research results to go more clear to the patient, more directly to individuals, and at the level of prevention, but also diagnosis or treatment, right? This is the idea, and it's very simple. We are not treating schizophrenia, we are treating you that have something wrong. So that's the idea, that's the promise, or that's the challenge, if you want. It's a very difficult challenge, and at the moment there are very few applications in the field in which I think is working already. There are things happening in the clinics, it's in cancer, and many of you probably have heard about it, that now in many cases you have a cancer and they sequence your cancer. They sequence the cells that are going wrong in your body, and based on that, even if you have the same cancer, pancreas cancer, they are going to give you a different treatment, depending if the sequence that you get of your specific cancer. But in general, it's quite difficult, and still more difficult in psychiatry. Why is that? Because, I mean, if you make this distinction between somatic and mental disorders, somatic means from body, right? Soma is the body. Most of the disorders, you have something that you can see in the body. When the patient comes, you see something. For example, this patient has psoriasis. You can even see it with your eyes. Sometimes you have to go a bit deeper, but you still can see the cancers. You have machines and technology, and there is something wrong here. You see it. Or with a blood clot, you can just see it in the body with some technology. And in some cases, you just have some biomarkers. Well, you have diabetes because you get a sample of blood, you do some measurements, you say, wow, yeah, you have diabetes, but you have something there. With mental disorders, that's very difficult. You get a patient in the hospital, but you cannot identify anything in his body that is wrong. There is not the psychiatrist doesn't have many tools. Don't have many tools because there is not a blood test, there is not a brain imaging today that can tell, oh, this is wrong. And we all have the intuition, I mean, something has to be wrong in some place, in the brain or whatever, and some scientists, and I think that Santiago later will explain, there are things that go wrong in the brain that you can associate with that, right? That's what neuroscientists do. But as today, when somebody comes to the psychiatrist, to the clinic, there is nothing to do there. You don't know where to look for. And then it's okay, but we still want to do it, right? And we have this idea that, well, why we think that this is probably something also to do with the genes. Well, because that's known for a long time. Mental disorders are very heritable. They really have to do with genes. They run in families. They have families with depression, that they have more depression on average, or even combination of these disorders. When you quantify this thing, there are ways of quantifying how important are genes in a disorder. Mental disorders rank very high. Some of them, like ADHD or autism, they are in the 80%. I mean, it's very high. Some of them are lower, like depression, that you have this intuition. Depression maybe has a larger influence of the environment, right? But many of the mental disorders are clearly related with genes. And then the question is, no, just before, just a spoiler of later about the Danish, the Danish thing, just to show this thing about the the Danish Environment of Research. We just published this paper on the Danish genealogy and how to use this data to estimate these numbers that I just showed there. How do we estimate this heritability? How important are genes? Just looking at the relationship between how similar are related to diagnosis and mental disorders and other disorders, different kinds of relatives. And we, using registers in Denmark, we constructed the whole genealogy that is registered in the registers. We have more than 9 million people there. We created this big genealogy. We found that more than 5 million Danes are kind of connected in a big pedigree. So Danes are a big family. And I think that was curious. And with that, we made some calculations about the importance of genes in different kinds of disorders and how these disorders connect to each other. But that's the question there, looking about this mentalistic. We want to predict, and the question is if there is an importance of genes in mental disorders, can we use that to make genetic prediction, right? Can we predict? And that's a difficult task, right? Because as this guy said, predicting is quite difficult. But still, I think it's worth to try. And then I'm gonna make just try to simplify the version of what we do to try to predict things. So you know, all of you, that the genome is something like that, but larger, right? It's a sequence of letters, 4 types of letters, A, C, T, A, and G. And we have like 3 billion of that, like in a big line. And most of them, we have the same. And that's why we are all humans, right? And very, very similar. But still, there are sort of differences. And there are some points that I have an A, but somebody has a C. And there are many of these, millions of these places where we are different, and that's where we are different in the end. And the question is very simple that we do, and the models that we do are very simple. We just look a bunch of people with an A, a bunch of people with a C, and we see if they have more of one disorder or less. Something that simple. So people who has an A has a 2% of prevalence, and the people with a C has a 6%. Okay, that could be interesting. In reality, you never find, here I make this thing that like a super huge effect, that never happens, right? We have very small effects. And what that means that there is no power of prediction at all. We cannot predict anything. I have a name, you are giving me nothing. But what happens if we put together many of these things? Because what we do is, when we do the analysis, we take, imagine that that's the whole genome, all the chromosomes, 1, 2, 20 something, and you do this simple analysis to all the letters that vary. In this plot, there are like, this is a real plot for schizophrenia, a bit old. There are 10 million of those things, okay? And some of them, this is kind of a measure of the statistical evidence, but in a way it's related to the effect. So many of them are very, very small effects, or almost nothing, but some of them have an effect. What happens if we put all this together and we try to predict with that? Can we do better? And just stressing that there are many, many variants that can be associated with a disorder, but individually, all of them have very, very tiny effects. So the idea is kind of like that. This is a simplified version with, instead of 10 million, I have like 5 different variants, right? And if you have the great thing is the low risk variant, you get the A, let's say. And if you get the red one, you were unlucky, you get the one that has a small risk. When you start accumulating, the ones that have all the good alleles for this specific disorder, they are in the low risk. In the guys that are unlucky, they are in the high risk, right? And then you get like kind of these distributions that they are the ones with less risk, they have less burden of disorder, with higher risk tend to be cases. But still, you have all the gray area, right? If you are here, you are more likely to be a control, but still you can be a case. So the prediction is not going to be perfect, but that's a bit the idea. So what we do is we take these results. From there, we have an idea of how important, how risk you can get from any of these small variants. And then when you go to the clinic, you get one of these chips that cost only like 20 euros. They get your specific values in these 10 million variants. And with these weights, you make a number that is your genetic risk score. Okay, this is your risk based on this analysis, on this data. And with that, you can be lucky and be here, quite in the left of the distribution, or you can be unlucky and be in the right of the distribution. That's the general idea. It's not only for mental disorders, it's for everything. Does it work? Well, more or less. There is a lot of hype on that now. And this is like few years ago, there was this paper in Nature, and they were doing this kind of analysis for cardiovascular disorders. They took like 300,000 people and did this analysis, and they said that here is where is this score. This is the lowest scores, the highest scores, and the prevalence for the disorder, in this case cardiovascular disorder. When they saw is the ones with the lowest score, they are around here, like a 1-2% of prevalence. If you are in the 70%, you are already doubling the risk. And if you go to the really high scores, you can be much higher. So the idea is that these common, very, very, very tiny effects, when we put it together, they can have effects that are comparable with other risk factors that we are using now in the clinic, like rare mutations and things like that, that today are used in the clinic. Maybe combining all these things together, they could have and use in the clinic. And this is still to prove. I mean, there are not that many cases. I don't think there are any cases that is proved yet. But the kind of questions, there are a lot of people working on that. And now I know people working in these specific questions, clinical questions in psychiatry that could be addressed, or they are trying to be addressed with these kind of methods. I put there 3 examples. You have this teenager that arrived to the clinic. The psychiatrist say this is an ADHD. And the question is, okay, is he at risk of developing schizophrenia as an adult? Because that happens more often, but you don't know which ones. Could you just looking at the genes there say, okay, this guy is at risk. Let's start some preventive treatment now before that goes worse in 5 years, right? Or people who arrive and you say, oh, you have a depression. But the question is, are you going to be instead a bipolar disorder person? Because that is going to be very different. And if you give this person now the treatment for depression, it's going to be worse if he in reality is a bipolar. But you are going to see that later, and that's going to be bad. So if at this point you could say, it's more likely that you are in the bipolar than in the depression road, that could be super useful. Another example, this person arrives, oh, that's bad, you have some schizophrenia. At the moment, you just have like a protocol, let's say you have a schizophrenia, we start with this drug. In many people it doesn't work, you change the drug. In many people it doesn't work, you can be like 2 years until you find something that works. If at the beginning, just looking at these predictions, you could predict which drug is going to work better, you can save a lot of time, a lot of risk, a lot of suffering in these people. So questions that are there, suitable to be addressed with these kind of methods. So as I said, this is kind of a big thing, but the idea is that you need many people to find these tiny effects in this kind of analysis that I was saying. You need huge sample sizes. The one I saw in cardiovascular was 300,000 people. That's the level that you need at least to start finding many of these small effects, just to get the weights that make these tools available. And then just to show what's happening in Denmark regarding to these mental disorders, trying to gather big samples on that. And this, I participate in this project. It's called IPSYCH, and the main goal is to identify causes of mental disorders by studying genetic and environmental factors, and thereby find new targets for treatment, but also prediction is in there. And this is a collaboration with 4 different institutions and 6 different groups. I'm here in the hospital, in the institute directed by Thomas Bell, and this project has been funded by Lunde's Foundation. So the Lunde Foundation put a lot of money so that we could work on that. We put together like 80,000 cases of mental disorder in Denmark, a cohort of random people of 50,000 to compare. And that's possible because of this amazing environment that we have here to work, because we can put together a lot of different kind of registers, biobanks, where we have samples of people. But then you can merge this thing with these registers of all your history of health, all your clinical history, and also the civil registrations is where I got the parents for everybody so that we could build this genealogy. So you know not only what happened to you, but what happened with your relatives, right? And this is very cool and very unique. And all these samples from IPSYCH, for example, we got it from this biobank. That's what you get when babies are born, and then 2 or 3 days later they got some bloods from the feet, I think, and that's stored in a place in the Serum Institute, and there are 2 million people there, 2 million Danes that we have this data and can be used for research, right? So that's why there was, some years ago, an editorial in Science saying the epidemiologist dream Denmark, right? It's a place where you can do amazing things. Has been traditionally just with the registers, it's quite amazing. But now when you can merge that with the biobanks, it's even better. And just the final note, these numbers look big, but they're not big enough. So in the end, and that was in the list that Gerardo put there, one of the records was also this international collaboration and putting data together, and that has to be done. 80,000 people is not enough. So we also work with this Psychiatric Genomics Consortium. This is like an international project that they just take these kind of samples for many different countries, and they are in total, depending on the disorder, you can have 500 cohorts of different countries, and then you put everything together so that you can reach the hundreds of thousands of patients in your studies. There are now already publications for some, not for psychiatry, in other disorders you have more than 1 million people in the study. It's quite large. So final thing, how is the glass? Is it half full or half empty? And I don't know, it's definitely not full, because I don't know today any clinical application of these tools that I was describing here. But I don't think it's empty either, because I think that there are many people working on that. There's a lot of resources, not only in Denmark, in many countries, and so in some places it's at the level of the nation, like in Estonia, Finland. I mean, all the Nordics are quite good on that, but also now in the US there are some states that are working heavily, companies. That's the point, that you see that you are close when companies are investing on it. They are hiring scientists from the academia. You see that we are reaching a point, I think, that should give some results in the next few years. Gracias.
Maybe now? Good. Okay. So now, thank you, both of you. I think we are making science sexy, And we are going to have now a break, okay, more or less around half an hour. You will have coffee out there, so spend some time, just get coffee, tea, water, whatever floats your boat. And then we will continue. So, thank you. Also, for the people online, also to say, sorry, that if you have any question for panelists, after lunch, we will have a round table. So we will have time to address them, all the questions that we want. I think they were really interesting.
You mean after the break, right? So after, where is the roundtable?
After lunch. Yes, yes. Also, if you want to take it in a more personal way, you can address them now during the coffee. But no, it was just to say that there will be time for questions. Thank you. Uh, are we all here? Yeah, I think so. Perfect. Before to start with the next panel presented by Santiago, I need to announce a last-minute change in the program. We were supposed to go through Santiago's presentation and Tonina's presentation, then have a break, lunch break, and after that we were supposed to have a round table with all the panelists. Because of a last-minute thing, we had to switch the lunch break and the round table, so we will go through the two presentations, and right after that we will do the round table. And then we will all have lunch together, and we can go to the soup. Next presenter is Santiago Mora. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you for coming.
¿Así? Sí, ¿no? So, thank you all very much for attending this great initiative by the Society. My name is Santiago Mora. I'll give you a brief talk about the preclinical models, animal models, all of them. It's a topic you would guess I'm very passionate about, and I hope that part, at least, of that passion I can share with you today. So we'll have a very brief introduction about the, let's say, the justification of using animals for science, and what means to model and to use animals in science. And then I'll talk about some psychological constructs that are related to the topic today of mental health, and which experimental paradigms and models are used for exploring experimentally these constructs. So I don't need to talk very much about science. Basically, it's a tool for answering questions. It's not perfect, but still is the best we have up to date. It relies on both a pragmatic value. This is trying to solve actual problems that affects us or other animals or the environment itself, but also it relies on our inner curiosity just to explain the natural world, which is as valid as a purpose as the first one. As I said, it's a very powerful tool because it provides us with a theoretical framework to work within. It gives some guidelines for basically ensuring an appropriate experimental control. And this is very important. It leads the way of how to incorporate the finds we have in our research to the existing literature. Basically, we can talk about two different branches of scientific method, which are the inductive reasoning and the hypothetic deductive reasoning. But as far as we can tell today, they are not opposite tools, but more two different stages on one unified process, okay, in which both of them are, can be integrated. As we said, science is the best we have, but it's not bulletproof, it's not perfect. Basically, we accept or reject our hypothesis with only a certain degree of confidence, okay? Some fields, of course, as we have said before, are easier to study than other fields. Like, for example, physics of surfaces adherence is a bit easier to study that depression, okay, for example, or ADHD. And we have to take into account also that we still rely on the human factor, because at least mostly, we the scientists are still humans, and as thus, we are fallible, okay? So, why do we use animals in research? We can give some big reasons. The first of all is, of course, based in evolution. In the same way that we share with other animals all the physiological processes, especially as they are evolutively close to us, we do share as well all the psychological processes, like learning, memory, etc., etc. But with the huge advantage that it's a less complex system, okay? An animal is easier to study because there are no such things as, for example, education, social pressure, all those factors that affect humans are way minimized with the use of animals, okay? And of course, we can have a more strict experimental control. When I started in science, I was a research assistant with humans, performing an experiment of hypothesis generation and attention, okay, with human participants that were students of psychology of the University of Granada in Spain. One day, I was analyzing the data of the last subject, and it was very weird data. It made no sense. It didn't fulfill the very basics of what we had expected in that paradigm. And I thought I had, messed up the analysis or that something went very wrong. But when asking this guy, he admitted that he had smoked marijuana before going to the lab, and that largely explained the weird data. We can never be completely sure, but we can imagine that with the use of animals, that's not, that kind of a risk. Still, we'll see. And of course, there are some methods that are not acceptable or not feasible in humans, okay? But we can do it with animals. This is, however, very heavily regulated, okay? There is European legislation that is interpreted by the national organisms in each country, in its member state, that basically tells what you can and you cannot do with research animals, okay? In the case of Denmark, the organism is the Djurforsøgstilsynet, kind of, which is the inspectorate for animal research, okay? That is the organism that gives licenses to the researchers and basically looks after good practice. It's kind of apparent that it's a decreasing trend in Europe to the use of animals. This is every year, it seems like less and less animals are used in research. Part of this is due to the development of alternative methods, for example, in vitro studies or computational approaches. But it's also true that the legislation keeps stricter and stricter each year, okay? Even though every debate should be welcome and it's reasonable to stop and think about things, the thing is that it's a fact that the use of animals in research has granted humans a mean of 20 more years of life expectancy. So it's always good to stop to think about this, okay? So, what do we mean with animal models? What does it mean to model something? It basically, we can say that it's an analogy, okay? That it's a, let's say, a tool for replicating a condition as similar as possible as the condition which happens in humans, okay? It, of course, does not 100% replicate what happens in humans, because as we said before, we don't have such a complex system, but we have the liability enough to use those models to study these more complex conditions. In the case of psychology and mental health, as we are talking today, it's very important to define very well what are we studying, okay? This is, for example, when studying cardiovascular diseases, there's more of a, let's say, an agreement of what things are. But in the case of depression, for example, I mean, we don't even agree on what is depression. But the thing is that if we are trying to model depression, we have to have this strong theoretical framework of what to expect, okay, and how a depressed rat should behave like, okay? So this is the basic, the course of action that we could expect is that starting from a construct, we planify our research, okay, which is as well interpreted based on the construct to give some conclusions. These conclusions should be aimed to either reinforce, say, okay, this is right, or to modify the existing construct. So by the time goes, we keep refining things, okay? Of course, the use of animals in research is not new. It's as old as we can find it in the 4th century before Christ, where Aristotle is considered as the first one to use animals for research, okay? I couldn't find a picture of the moment, but we can rely on this drawing. This is actually from the Middle Ages, and it shows Galen, the father of modern medicine, performing a vivisection on a pig about the innervation of the vocal cords, okay? So this is like the first examples we can find, and I tried to find what was the latest that had come in neuroscience, and this is the last paper that I have seen published by a very quite classical now journal, which is Frontiers in Behavioral Neuroscience, which studies autism with the use of transgenic mice. In this case, they study a gene which is correlated with high risk of autism, and it's a model of conditional, basically silencing of the gene. So they can use, for example, food to silence this gene, so it doesn't command the production of the proteins related to it, and then simulate what would happen if we erased the gene, okay? So things have evolved quite a lot since then. And I would like to give you some examples of behavioral paradigms of animal models for studying some of the main behavioral domains that we have. I wanted to start from the very basic, which is movement. I think it's very straightforward. We can see it externally, okay? And this is maybe the most basic paradigm that we could use for assessing behavior. It's an open field, and basically it consists on the animal, the rats, the mice, whatever, wandering around and doing things rats and mice do, okay? Sniffing things, peeing, pooping, all that kind of stuff. But we can do movement a bit more complicated, okay? This is, for example, a treadmill that is used also in studies about movement. When we can modify the speed at which the belt moves. We can, this is actual evidence from our lab. We can use machine learning and basically teach a computer to identify relevant markers in the movement of the mice to see whether it's moving correctly or incorrectly. This is crucial because even at stages when the animals are apparently well, these can detect things that the researchers cannot detect by, using just the eye, okay? We can also, of course, measure, assess sensory systems. Like this is one very common example about the whiskers of the rats and mice. Basically, what authors have found is that they have a representation, a somatotopic representation in the cortex of these whiskers, okay? But it's also important to take into account that the sensory information itself may not be the main goal of this study, okay? Of course, learning and memory, they are processes very relevant itself, but also as prerequisites for everything that we do after that. I mean, we can really rely on our results in other tasks if we are not sure whether the animals are capable of learning things and remembering things, okay? So this is as well a very basic paradigm, which is called the Morris-Water maze. The mice in this case is not swimming in milk, it's water with, with attention, okay? That basically makes it white to hide this platform that the mice of the rat tries to reach, okay? But we don't want the animal to reach it using the vision, okay? So as the trials go by, the animals learn to go directly instead of just wandering and swimming around. We can also study it with, which is called novel object recognition. Basically, we expose the animal to some objects, and then we change one of the objects. What we will expect to find in a healthy animal is that it will spend more time exploring the new object than the already known object, okay? Another important domain, fear and anxiety, okay? This is crucial because here we are trying to investigate internal states. I mean, things that are not apparent externally, but we can make this, this inference. Fear conditioning is a very classical task, very robust, which consists in presenting associated a tone, this is a sound, with a mild foot electric shock, and then measuring whether the animal reacts freezing to only the tone alone, okay, in the absence of the shock. We can also employ, which is a more anxiety-pure paradigm, the elevated plus maze. This is not a huge fall for the animals. They would survive, of course, the fall, but they try not to fall. So they feel more safe, they feel safer in the closed arms than in the open ones. So it's a very sensitive measure. It's a very good paradigm to assess either individual differences between animals, okay, or differences before and after one experimental treatment or experimental event, whatever. We can also explore social behavior. This is crucial in social species, such as humans as well, okay? We can do it, for example, with this paradigm, which is called the three-chamber test or the Crowley test. It's similar to the object recognition, but in this case, we don't expose the animal to objects, but to other animals, which, of course, they want to make contact with. We can also assess dominance. This is very basic. We introduce one mouse or rat here, another one here, and when they meet here in the center, we remove the stopper and see which one manages to push the other one out of the tube. Okay, so we can establish a social hierarchy. But, and this is very funny, we can assess also the ultrasonic vocalizations. Rats and mice especially express in a frequency that we are not able to hear, okay? So we can translate that frequency to a range that we are able to hear, okay? This is the pattern, like put visually, of a pup calling for its mother, okay, when separated. But rats and mice do not only emit this vocalization under aversive situations. It can be also another interesting phenomenon that I wanted to share with you.
Scientists knew rats loved to be tickled, especially on their backs and bellies. A tickled rat lets out tiny giggles, too high for us to hear. Special microphones captured the squeaks so they could be replayed in a lower register. Belly and back tickles elicited giggles galore. Tail tickles? Not so much. The rats will chase a researcher's hand for more.
We can also, like, we're moving a bit more abstract each step. We can also measure attention, okay? In this case, this is a quite classic task, which is called the signal detection task. Basically, the rat or the mouse has to be aware of what's happening around to know when to perform the operand response to get reinforced. This is a bit more complex task, which is called the 5-choice serial reaction time task. That is, the idea is the same, but in this case, it provides more information about some other domains, okay? We can also move a bit forward to inhibitory control, which usually expressed when fails as either compulsive or impulsive behaviors. We are more aware of this. For compulsivity, we can measure it with a reversal learning, in which the animal learns to press one of these levers to get reinforced, and then we change the contingencies. And it's the other one which is reinforced now. So we have to, we measure here if the animal is able to shift the preference, okay, and to adapt to the new contingencies. We can also do it with a very interesting paradigm, which is called schedule-induced polydipsia, on which animals are food deprived. I mean, they are a bit hungry, and they're exposed to an intermittent reinforcement, which means that every 60 seconds, every minute, they get a food pellet, okay? And they have water available throughout. For some reason, some of the animals, even though, let's remember, they are hungry, not thirsty, they start to drink a huge amount of water, okay? And it's a valid model for studying compulsivity. For impulsivity, we can use the delay discounting task, which is an adaptation of the classic question of, do you prefer 5 kroner now or 5,000 kroner in 2 months? Okay, adapted to rats. Or the rodent gambling task, which is adaptation for the Iowa, on which the animals have 4 mazes of different advantageous options to see what ones they choose. And finally, some authors are pushing up the ante a bit more and trying to go for very abstract concepts and things that classically were not considered to be found in rodents, only in primates. For example, empathy and theory of mind. This is from a very funny paper from the last year, on which, among other things, the authors investigated whether the animals were able to identify suffering in other rats, and trying to comfort them, okay, by their side. So the experimental animal was exposed to 2 demonstrator animals. One was neutral, like a rat just hanging around, and to a demonstrator that have been exposed to fear, okay, or to stress. And basically what they found is that the rats spend more time trying to comfort this animal. That's like saying, okay, mate, it's okay, I'm here with you, than with the demonstrator animal. So we don't know, but it's possible that we can expect more things in animals that we did before. So basically, this is it. I think there are reasons to consider the use of research animals in the field of mental health, okay? We have to be very aware that the welfare of experimental animals is now more taken seriously than ever, right? And on a negative note, we have to be prepared for the possibility that it never comes a day when we can shift completely from experimental animals to other alternatives. So this is my research group here. I was able to shout out. And finally, thanking you and thanking them for making this possible.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you very much. First, I would like to start with a brief meditation. Please close your eyes. Be in a comfortable position. Breathe deeply in and out 3 times. Now, in a short exercise of imagination, let's visualize the following. Rewind to the moment when you were about to set off for the country you are living in at present. Can you recall that event? How long ago was that? Specifically, we are going to visualize the moment we were packing. Do you remember? Were you looking forward to it? Were you eager to set off? Were you thrilled, restless, or perhaps fearful when you were arranging things for your journey? How did you feel? Now, from this very moment we are right now, if you could go back to the packing scene and add to your baggage another suitcase of personal resources, which personal resources would you put in? Thank you very much. Living abroad is an experience that places a person out of their comfort zone. On one hand, it's a great opportunity for gaining personal and professional growth. And on the other hand, it can even be felt as a threat because it challenges our personal resources. Loneliness, frustration for not being able to express ourselves in a new language, or the quest for a job can prove as a source of distress. Which are the factors that may lead to a stressing, unsatisfactory, or difficult outcome? And which ones may lead to a fulfilling, edifying experience? Mainly, it depends on our personal resources. In this speech, I'm going to talk from the standpoint of my professional experience about this migration journey, its different stages from the psychological and emotional point of view. I will delve in 2 aspects that concern every migrant person, and those are migration grief and reverse cultural shock. Sorry. Okay. Before developing the actual subject, I would like to talk about myself, where I come from, who I am. I'm Tonina Ferrer, I'm a psychologist and a coach. I'm specialized in well-being and personal development. I have devoted 10 years of my professional activity to work with Spaniards who live abroad in order to provide support in the process of developing their personal resources, thus enabling them to maximize their potential and well-being. I'm a specialist in migration and mental health, and most of my clients are researchers, scientists, engineers, architects. I have been a migrant, although in a minor scale. I'm from Mallorca, and I went to Barcelona, where I was for 15 years. I have gone through the same stages as you, and I know firsthand what migration difficulties are. having to face hardships, setbacks, and important lessons that result from living away from our usual environment. These people I work with, what do they have in common? They have discerning minds that wonder at intellectual curiosity. They are interested in asking themselves questions and finding answers and solutions to their problems. At a personal level, they are responsible and purposeful. They are aware of their willingness to become better parents, better couples, better citizens, better professionals, better people. They are often non-conformist, wanting to explore options. They are open-minded and exhibit great disposition to learn. What makes them come to my office for consultation? They usually come for one of these following reasons. They sense they have too much mental activity, which ends up in stress and exhaustion. They are prone to get in mental looping and dead-end doubts and arguments. These traits can lead to extreme negativity. Or their emotional state may feel overwhelming, lacking tools to manage it. Stress, sadness, anxiety, demotivation, frustration, annoyance. Or they feel lost or stuck in certain areas of their lives. Or they feel lack of self-esteem and self-assertion. Adversity strikes them. They don't know how to manage. Or they feel that mind, emotion, and action they are not in harmony. What benefits do my client get from doing interpersonal work and taking care of their mental health? What is the outcome? A deeper self-knowledge that enables them to be in touch with themselves. Learning of personal resources and tools to boost their psychological well-being and getting reassurance in present and future hardships. Awareness and transformation of former learning boundaries and limitations. The relationship with the past is improved, at the same time, in the relationship with the future is improved too. The overall outcome is the ability to focus and fully live up the present. A strengthening of self-esteem and self-assertion, which create a kind, empowering, edifying relation with oneself. Development of a fertile interiority, an inner home in which one can feel at ease no matter where. The person who resorts to consultation in the frame of her experience as a migrant will be on one of these stages that are in the title of this speech. Let's examine these stages. The first phase is the decision-making and farewell stage. When the person makes the decision, it's important to be aware of the whys and wherefores of this migration. A migration due to a personal constraint as a split up or a complex family situation is very different from the migration of a person who departs to thrive professionally. Whatever the case, in this stage, the individual says goodbye and leaves his place of origin, longing what is expected from the change. The second phase is the stage of adaptation to the new home. At the beginning, the person usually goes through a phase of idealization and is enamored with his destination. He's engulfed by novelty and everyday struggles. Later on, adaptation to the host country will be the challenge. In order to adapt, the individual denies the partial loss that the change may entail. There is a sort of illusion. In Spain, things remain as I left them, and whenever I want, I can go back and find the country as it was. Being enamored can be followed by disenchantment. The new residing place doesn't meet the expectations. Difficulties and problems may arise and trigger some personal crisis. If those are overcome, the person may settle in the new country. The third phase is the one of the making decision, either settling in a new country or returning to the country of origin. If the person decides to settle in the new country, here it's important to elaborate his migratory grief, that I will explain next. If the person decides to go back to his country of origin, it will be relevant the reverse cultural shock. First, let's define the concept of migratory grief. What is a mourning process? We normally relate grieving or bereavement with death. But grieving is not only related with death, but with breakdowns, for example, separations between couples, change of job, etc. We could define the process of grieving as a reorganization that the psyche resorts to when we go through a loss. Thus, the grieving process has to do with loss and not only with death. It's worth remembering, however, that grieving is a normal, healthy process and not a pathologic condition. We are constantly elaborating mourning processes. Then, what is the migratory grief? It's the process associated to the losses of the migratory experience. And what is the characteristics? The first one is the partial, The first one is that it is a partial grieving. Unlike what happens in death, the object of migratory grief doesn't physically disappear. The country of origin and all that entails doesn't vanish but remains, and the person can contact with that reality. The second is that it is a recurrent grieving. It's revived when the person visits Spain, for example, or through telephone calls. This emotional going to and fro to the country of origin makes the elaboration of the separation process a recurrent pattern. And it's a multiple grieving to many things: family, friends, language, culture, traditions, custom, religion, values, the land, landscape, etc. Migratory grieving can be expressed in different ways. First, feeling an emotional ambivalence between two cultures. The emotional pair love-hate is present both towards the people of the country of origin and the host country. For example, we idealize Spain and adore the way people relate socially, but at the same time, we cannot stand the working world in Spain. Homesick feelings can be present, as well as the interest for Spanish stereotypes and commonplaces. For example, the person can start taking flamenco classes. It can be expressed with guilt toward the persons that have been left. Or difficulties to make decisions may arise and be a hindrance to their vital project, because they don't know how long they are going to be in the CET Welcoming. And the personal identity is here another issue. Individuals feel that they are like in identity limbo. They are considered neither Spanish nor Danish, in this case. It's worth noticing here that the migration grief needs not to be overcome, but elaborated. Elaborating implies being aware of the losses at the cognitive level, but simultaneously being able to feel them at an emotional level. That is to say, allowing ourselves to be sad, but that undermining our wished projects in the new country we decide to dwell. And what happens at emotional level when we decide to go back to our country of origin? Inverse cultural clash, what is it? The process is considered as another migration with the same consequences and same changes. Only the thing who undertakes it is often taken by surprise because he's unaware of the migration effect. When he migrated in the first place, he was indeed aware. We wish sometimes to return so badly that many a times our happiness hinges upon too much on it. Again, we idealize the return. We too often overlook that fact that we have changed, the new home has changed, and so our beloved and friends. We are in front of a new migratory grieving. In this case, which losses are we talking about? Loss of freedom, especially if we go back to villages or small towns. So far, we have enjoyed an anonymous status, the freedom of being who we want to be. But on our way back, we are conditioned by the expectation people place on us, which may constrict our personal freedom. They may be the loss of purchasing power, since the working status may diminish. The loss of links with people met in the host location, who are as family for the migrant person. The values and lifestyle of the host country. And during their absence, new scenarios in family, friends, places have been established, and this realization may add to the list of drawbacks. Okay. I'd like to conclude with a final meditation, please. With eyes closed and in a comfortable position, feet on the floor. Let's be attentive to our breathing, inhaling and exhaling deeply. 1, 2, 3. When we started, we visualized the past moment in our lives. Let's now fast forward to the future. Some years have elapsed, and you have settled. Whether you are in a foreign country or your own, you feel now at home wherever you are. You are at ease. You are in peace with yourself. You have acquired wisdom, and you are able to realize the positive aspects and lessons that encompass every experience. What personal resources do you have? Thank you very much. It's finished.
Now we are going to proceed with the round table. We need to set up the thing, so it's also a good time for a bathroom break. So in case you want to go, now it's the time.
La espontaneidad se pierde. Bueno,
No, yo voy a estar de pie. Bueno. Como puede atestiguar Santiago, nunca es una buena idea meterse entre un animal y su comida. Entonces, vamos a empezar. En principio, vamos a tener esta conversación. Vamos a poner como más o menos media hora. Si la cosa está muy viva, continuamos un poco. Hemos escuchado a 3 expertos. Sí. Sorry, now I'm going to do the English part. We're going to get started now. About half an hour just to get started. But like, if we think that the discussion is going on and is lively, we can continue on. We have listened to 3 experts working at very different levels of the chain of causality between the micro, the molecular, and then dealing with the deep social complex issues that have to do with migration and health, all of which many of us have experienced, right? And so I wanted to talk about that last part. I mean, migration sometimes is choice, sometimes is something that is forced, and very recently we're seeing a wave of involuntary migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers here in Denmark and in many other countries, Ukrainian refugees that are coming. A little bit unlike other previous waves of asylum seekers, these ones have been welcomed with open arms, and so we're learning more about what they're going through compared with previous waves of asylum seekers. And so one of the things that we're learning is that they are coming with a number of mental health issues related to stress and post-traumatic stress disorders and anxiety, and a lot of specialists are dealing with them. There's good tools to deal with that. But then sometimes, one wonders, what is the connection between what we have talked about, sometimes very detailed, right? And how we can make things better and help these people that come in acute distress, right? How it is that, working with animal models, that working with genetics, that working with what, some of the experience that you've mentioned, you mentioned those profiles of like high learners and the like. It's a lot more like an expat than an asylum seeker, right? So how is all of that relevant to these people that come in distress? I think I wanted to start the conversation there to go then a little deeper about the role of what our internal own mechanisms versus the external world has on our mental health. And I wanted to mention also as well that Tonina has asked me that sometimes if she feels that she's going to be more proficient in giving her explanation in Spanish, then I can make a summary afterwards for the audience. So I'd like to get started with that, and I think I'd like Alfonso to get started, because like in a way your research having to do with genetic markers is in a way farthest from the macro view, right? What can you say about how like the research that you do, which is kind of long-term and focused on very small things, can actually be helpful for people like the waves of refugees that we're seeing and others that will definitely come?
Hola. Yeah, I think that what I'm going to try to explain a bit, I mean, I explain all this genetic part, but this is very clear that all complex traits and mental disorders too, there is this interaction, right? You have the mental thing and you have your environment, and it's not the same if you are a refugee or you just live at home, very comfortable in your country, right? Then how try to put this thing together and how to explain that. And I've seen that some of the clinical psychiatrists that I work with in my group, they have like a an explanation even when they talk to the patients. And they have this explanation of they have some drawings. It's like a jar that the idea is that you can put balls in the jar, and when you fill it, is when you have a problem. You have some thing that you need help, let's say. So the idea is to fill the jar is a problem. And the idea of this, the environment is kind of adding risk to the jar, right? Every bad thing that you have, that's going to add on. Suddenly your father has a very serious disease. No, that's bad. I start feeling out of place. Now I have to migrate, or I have myself some problems. I got a broken heart or something. All these things are adding risk. But the idea is who is going to... The idea is that are another balls that are already in the jar when you are born, the ones that comes from genetics. So when we are born, we go already with a jar, and this jar can be almost empty, or can be very close to the top. And that's the thing that, of course, the environment is going to be the trigger in the end, quite often. But it's going to be much easier for somebody who is lucky and comes with a empty jar than somebody that already, his reaction to these stressful things that happen every day, I mean, it's more compromised. It could be very easy for some people just, okay, my girlfriend left me, I'm very bad, I want to die or something, right? For some people that's kind of easy, and for other people it's like, well, I don't know, I'll do something. So I think that this explanation of these two things are both very important, and both have to be taken into account. And in my side, of course, I put more emphasis in what I know and what I can measure, but it's not the only thing. So what to do? I don't know what to do, but in some way, this kind of projects, like the one I was presenting, is one of the goals is to try to identify people that are already by construction in a way with a quite full jar, because these people are going to need more help. And you cannot help, of course, the optimal would be to help everybody, right? And you just put everybody with a coach that has like 2 sessions a week, and yeah, that could be great, but that cannot be done. So the idea could be, if you can in some way identify people that are going to need more help, that maybe you can do something. And that is at the level of the individual, but even at the level of the society, of the health system. That's a bit the idea. It could be with children, school, that you already know that they are, because of construction or because of the family, trying to find people at risk or with more risk, and then trying to do something with these people to prevent what is happening in the future.
Thanks a lot, Alfonso. What's your take on that, Tonina?
I will try to explain in English. Yes, from psychology, from my work, I try to this jar to add new tools and new strategies or resources to help these people to manage the situation better. No, I think that is extreme situation. That is a migration with. Reason very, very big and very stress situation. And then it's not like a migratory grief, it's more than this. And then it's like a pyramid, the Maslow, you know, the Maslow pyramid, no? That the psychologist is not the first necessity need, and then maybe they need like basic help. And then, of course, psychologist is very, very important. It's not because it's not important, but of course that they need like big help to add, to try first to recuperar.
To recover.
To recover a little bit the calm, no? Because it's not, in that moment, I think that is very, very difficult. And a lot of psychological help. And then the most important thing will be later, no? Because it's not only in the moment, as later when the time is going, and then what happens with these people, no? Because in that moment it's like a lot of help because of a catastrophe and this, and then after this, people with a lot of balls in the jar and with little, they don't help them anymore. And then I think it's very important there, the psychologist in the mid and in the long way, because if they don't manage well, maybe will develop some disease at the end or some big problem. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. A very important issue, that one of mental care for refugees and asylum seekers being an option that happens in the long term, right? It's not only the psychological distress that they're experiencing because of the situation, but the long-term effects. I'll give the word to Santiago, but also I'll tell the audience this is time that you can think about your own questions. After Santiago gives this first opinion, then we'll just open the audience. If you don't have questions, I have a lot. So now let's continue. Again, if you have some questions right after Santiago gives his opening one, then we can take them. Santiago first, go ahead.
So, world is extremely complicated, I guess. It never ceases to amaze us with brand new conflicts and plagues, as we have seen in the last years. And we are now more aware than ever about them, how different aspects and different factors interact with each other, leading to a situation that is, our ability of explaining things, even though we know more than ever, there's this feeling of that it's complicated to establish some like firm predictions. This is why I like that much this kind of chances, because it's like a whole picture of the same battle. We are every one of us within. We have people in the trenches, like Tonina, and people in the, holding up, trying to figure out new things. So it's very important to keep this in mind, that things interact with each other, and nothing is ever monofactorial. But I would also make you think about the fact that this is why basic research is crucial. We have to hold on to something, and if we don't have these basic tools from the very beginning, from the molecular mechanisms and the genetic factors, everything that we build among these, if we don't have that clear, will be, castles in the air, as we say in Spanish. So yeah, I think that even if we take into account this complex relationship between factors, we have to claim and to be very brave about reclaiming investment in basic research, I would say.
Right. Very fair point. Basic research is the kind of thing that one has always have to take into account and do, because you never know when it's going to be useful. Case in point, messenger RNA vaccines, which were thought of as a ridiculous proposition and science fiction less than 20 years ago. And here we are. Questions from our dear audience. Feel free to ask your question in English or Spanish. If it's in Spanish, I'll be happy to translate. There's one there.
Hello. I'm thinking about it's a strong tool to look at polygenic risk and SNPs and create a personalized imprint of our risk. as an individual. What are the ethical considerations behind that? Because that's really, it's like with everything, every event in science, you also have to consider the ethicals, because it's really posing a lot of ethical considerations in regards of if we get in a future with each of us at birth, we have already a personalized risk profile. That's also going to define a little bit, stratifies according, and also, of course, in the future, in insurance. I don't know if it's already in the US, have been discussed that some of them requires you have a personal. So how is this being dealt with?
We are short on microphones, so sorry. That's okay.
Thank you for the question. How it is deal? I'm not sure. But yeah, I mean, in one of the slides I didn't, when I put this slide, that was the two words there in a corner, it was utility and ethics, right? Because two things are, how useful is that? Well, that's a working question. It's a scientific question in a way. And that's easy in a way. It's just a matter of time that we know if that's going to be useful or not, and where and when. The other one is more complicated. How to deal with that? I mean, I think that with any other markers, in the end, sometimes I think that we have, in the society, there is like a special way of looking at genetics as if it was a bit more dangerous. But in fact, we already have risk predictors that are not genetic, right? If you have high cholesterol, you have more chances of having a myocardial infarction. In fact, we have also very good estimates already of genetic risks just looking at our family. If your parents had Alzheimer or your grandpas, you are more likely than other people that don't have it, right? So in a way, we are dealing with that already. I don't know how, but it's true. Your point is true that once we have these numbers, when you have like as I said, there are countries like Estonia that they are doing it at the government level. They have this biobank, and they are devising these kind of tools that you know from the beginning what's your risk and how that is going to evolve in time. I don't know how that's going to evolve. I think it's unfortunately, I think that we are still not there, that we have good enough predictors that's a problem. So I'm looking forward to the point that we really have that problem because the predictors are so good that we really have to do something. And then I think that society will figure out, like with the GDPR, right? At some point, the thing with the access to data that we were telling before, I mean, that has been there for a while, but at some point was so important that, okay, now we have to do something, and these guys sit down and do something. I think it would be something like that. So the moment that's really in the discussion in the European Parliament and this thing, that's could be a very good sign that we are in the right path.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Okay, so I have a question for Santiago, because we have a lot of animal models for a lot of things, Alzheimer, Parkinson, even probably anxiety. But depression is such a, kind of specific thing and so difficult to somehow diagnose, because I can tell you I'm depressed and you can't even, I might not be crying around all the time. But so is there any animal model that actually is used to somehow investigate depression and the consequences?
That's a very good point. I put depression because it's maybe the most dramatically complex phenomenon, one of those. And actually for many years, some researchers, especially medical practitioners who shifted to research, proposed an animal model of depression, which was called the tail suspension test, which basically consisted on they holding a mouse or a rat by the tail and measuring for how long the animal tried to battle that, to escape that. that raised some concern because it was considered too simple to be, a valid model of depression. So in this case, for example, depression, what most researchers are doing today is try to decompose it in the, let's say, the molecular components, for example, anhedonia and apathy, and trying to model those components individually, which is a bit more, of course, easier to investigate and a bit more easy to validate as well. So you can now model the, for example, whether the animal is expressing anhedonia. For example, giving the animal plain water and sugar added water, and trying to find if he prefers the water with sugar, which is a very basic yet very powerful index of whether we are looking for rewarding intake. And yeah, so I would say that it's how things try to be simplified today.
Yeah, probably. I mean, it's easier to at least have an intuition that from all the possible sets of diseases that could be modeled with animal models, psychological and mental health issues are probably the most complex, right? I mean, thinking about anything that has like clear biomarkers can more or less be replicated not without problems, right, in various animal models, but these ones are, yeah, particularly complex. I was thinking, Alfonso, on what you said about you're looking forward to the time when that's a problem. In a way, it's kind of a vicious circle, because one of the reasons why there isn't a lot of funding for that research is because of all the potential for misuse that politicians see. One thing, I've been interacting with policymakers for a long time, and politicians rapidly develop a very quick instinct to understand how something can be misused, right? They're very good at that. I had to say, no, it's actually good, because they are very good at thinking badly. And for once, I'm going to give them credit for doing so, because it could indeed be misused very quickly, right? Markers of undesirability, right? We have a long history in humanity of doing those. So is there, for instance, here in Denmark, I know that there's like good guarantees for all those things. What is the basic situation? How would you prevent that from happening using like a marker, say a company saying, we're not going to hire someone who, has a propensity for this and that, right?
I don't know how is the regulation of this. Probably they cannot, I don't know, in a hiring process, I don't think they can ask you for biological data today, probably. But there is a bit associated with this ethical problem is this, is also this idea that now you can do the the consumer genetics, right? So now there are companies in which you can get your profile. You buy this chip instead that I put there. You buy the chip. You have your letters. You upload it to a web page, and you get your things yourself, right? And how ethic is that? That's also a very interesting thing. When one of my closest friends here in Denmark, he has a service that did that, and has been in many debates here in Denmark, discussing with the public and with but also with the clinical geneticist. And I mean, there is an open debate now. Yeah. There is a lot of debate on what to do with this data. And, right. And I had some discussions with this Lasse Forkelsen, and he's kind of having a lot of opinions on how to deal with these things, and he's been in many debates. And there is also there is the discussion, as you say, that how the companies, insurance companies, but also there are even discussions with the clinical geneticists, with the people that in the end have the responsibility of putting the diagnosis and the health. They also are concerned themselves that you can just by yourself think, oh, but I'm at high risk of that and that. So we are now in this kind of waters moving here and there. And yeah. So I guess that at some point there are going to be some regulations for that.
Got it. More questions? Yes.
I have a question for Santiago. Why is it that you use mice and rats and not other animals? Why mice and rats?
Well, me myself have a bit of a bias towards rodents because they are the ones that I have more experience with. But I mean, the vast majority of mammals used in research are mice, followed by rats, of course. But there are a huge amount of different species used in research. For example, flies, worms. Geneticists, for example, use flies quite often because they have a very short life cycle. For development, for example, they use C. elegans, which is a model of worm. But they are also using zebrafishes, which have the big advantage of being transparent, so you can explore without opening the animal. And marmosets with primates is a bit more difficult because of the ethical regulation, but still there are some studies with them. And many different species. I try to get to that once because otherwise this would have been a very long day. And because they are for behavior, it's like traditionally the studies with rats and mice are the most common ones. So it's where things are more, let's say, advanced in that term. We know more about those models. But yeah, you can virtually use almost every animal that you can think about. You only have to refine your method, try to figure whether your model can be applied to that animal, because some animals, due to genetic profiles, are not cannot be tailored to a given model. And in fact, sometimes you discover things by chance with some animals. For example, there's a well-known model of compulsive behavior, which are the spontaneous hypertensive rats that was discovered by chance because they were crossing rats to have rats that were hypertensive. They were like they had this high blood pressure for cardiovascular research, but they discovered by chance that they were more compulsive. So now they use it for that purpose instead of the original one. So yeah, virtually you can use almost every animal.
Wow. I guess it's no coincidence that your presentation started with a deep explanation about why animal models are necessary. That's something, of course, given the public concern, this is something that I suppose you even have like preset slides that you share across departments for that. And I think it's important also sometimes to mention hard truths, like the fact that, I mean, Denmark has been in the European Union always a big advocate for animal welfare, and at the same time being the biggest producer of mink fur. Those two things are true in the same country. And so, yeah, sometimes you have to have honest conversations, you know, about where your pills come from and the like. Great. Yes, 2 questions Gonna go first?
Okay. I do have a follow-up question for you, Santiago. So for me now it's a bit difficult to connect, probably because I'm not from the field and I ignore most of the things. But let's say that you develop a model with animals, you get some conclusions. How do you translate that into, how do you go from the animal world to the human world?
That's the gold question here. First of all, you have to, from the very beginning, have a good construct, as we said before. And then you have to be fairly confident that the research question was adequately, defined. And if you do meet all those points, then you can start moving forward very slowly. So first of all, you try to, for example, let's think of a novel treatment for any disease in animals. The first step would be to be positively sure that you can't revert that condition, like cure that condition. But then you have to also make sure that you are not messing everything else up in the animal's body, like inducing, I don't know, toxicity or even. And when all of that has been like completely settled, then you can start doing like clinical trials, which, if I'm not wrong, have through 4 stages for the clinical trials, like step by step, trying to translate that from animals to humans. And only when you reach and pass that final step, the third stage, you can start producing it and administering to humans. But usually, for example, with vaccines, which are one of the most straightforward processes, it's around 8 to 14 years since the animal models to the starting with humans, and that's the fast way. So with animals can be like 20, 25 years or so for other phenomena. So yeah, but we try.
There's good reasons for that caution, though. We have had experiences. Next question.
Hi. Yeah. So I'm just wondering, because we are moving from in animal models to in vitro models to maybe in silico models, how feasible do you think it is as a reality? Do you think that we will be more this decrease of animals being used in the lab? Do you think that this will continue, or we will reach a maximum threshold that, okay, we cannot really reduce because otherwise we are losing somehow the random natural selection that it's happening? I don't know if you could put some words on this. Thank you.
For some fields of biomedical research, eventually there is going to come a moment when we can say goodbye to animal models, luckily. But for better or for worse, for behavior-wise research, I think we will never say goodbye to animal models. At least if it depends on us. Because you can study, for example, cancer, as we were talking before, like you can study in vitro the replication mechanisms and the apoptosis in cells, but with behavior you need a behaving organism. maybe the computational guys develop some crazy things in the next years that make me retract of these words, but as far as we can predict by now, I don't think we will never be, away from animal models. As for behavior as well, ever. I don't know if it's a bit too pessimistic, but
who knows? Sometimes things change faster than one may expect. There's another question. Yep.
Yes, it's a question for regarding the genetics and trying to get it a little bit more broader in regards that I'm thinking that often when looking at this genetic profiling, we're looking at genetic risk and kind of a risk profile, but I'm thinking we're looking at SNPs. Usually it's an evolutionary, and many of us have these SNPs that usually we're looking at. So they must have been there for something. It's like an evolutionary. And also inspired by your talk, Tonina, regarding the migration and we're exposed, and sometimes it's not even necessarily negative and adverse or a stressful situation like that, because it may give us something. And there are some individuals that are specifically resilient. And I'm thinking, why is not the focus laid on what makes us resilient when we are exposed to adverse situations? Because mental health, there's a really high numbers of people. I read once that the percentage of people that at some point in their lives are going to have some kind of mental health, anxiety, depression, whatever, is really high. But I think the amount, if you look at numbers of people that are really resilient when exposed to an adverse event, it's maybe lower, and there must be some genetic background. Why? It's like when we're looking at COVID and we're thinking of everybody that we know have been gone through a COVID episode, and the one of us that haven't been, we're looking like we're a little bit strange. Why? Why? There must be something that protects us. So why not looking at the protected genetic background, which maybe may give more power? I don't know.
Two things about it, I think. One is that the first one is that in a way you do a bit, because I was just remembering there is this colleague of mine that was working in a study of OCD in soldiers coming from war, and he was looking like the case is the one with the OCD, right? And the other ones are controls, like assuming the normal is you don't get anything, and if you get OCD, then this is the case. And then you find the variants that high risk for that. But in a way, when you, in this kind of experiment that all of them has been exposed for the same thing, and some of them have the one outcome and the others have the other outcome, you can see that result in the other way and say, okay, if these variants are the ones for the OCD, the opposite letter is kind of protecting you a bit. So in a way, you are looking a bit in that. Then, but what you say is interesting to look at it this way, because there are some projects doing that. There are people that say, okay, let's get us these registers and just look for people that have never in the hospital, right? Let's see what's special in these people, and that's the phenotype. In this case, it's like more general. It's not just know for a disorder, but very healthy, super healthy people, and it's a bit related with what Tonina was explaining me yesterday. That we are I think it's very interesting to look at the well-being instead of necessarily looking at this. We are always, or myself, in general in research, we are always thinking in, the disorder, right? When we are already with a problem, you go to the hospital and then you are there because you have depression, you have more studies in just how to keep well, probably could be also also needed. I think that also could be cool, and it's a bit related with what you say.
Because I think maybe depression is a natural consequence of migration.
Yeah. And there is another thing that when you were starting the questions came to me. When we talk sometimes about this, I've done it even myself, and it's wrong, but I'm going to just be more precise. We talk about bad letters, or letters that are bad for you, no? And the ones that are good for you. That only makes sense for a specific context when I say for schizophrenia or for depression, but not in general, because as you were saying, this variation is there, has been there for many generations. Well, maybe it can be chance, but probably it's for a reason, right? And there are a lot of studies that they also make these associations of some of the variants that are bad for mental disorders are also associated with things that we don't think as bad, as creativity, for example. And there are very nice studies in Iceland that the relatives of people with schizophrenia that don't have schizophrenia, so they didn't contact, they are much more creative. They are in creative professions and things like that. So this idea that these variants are just bad in general is not necessarily true. And Thomas Bell, the director of my institute, is very much into this thinking that our aim is not to remove these variants from the population. If we remove all the various variants that are increasing the risk for mental disorders, maybe we are not humans anymore, right? And I think that that's also an interesting thought, that it's not like a black or white thing. It's just to find a right balance of the things that we like as humans without going to without filling the jar in a way.
Right. So, Tonina, what's your take on that?
I wanted to add in this topic because from my point of view, I'm not a researcher, I'm not a scientist, but I can see from my point of view, I cannot put my focus on genetic, on these things, because it's not my specialty, no? But I think that this resilience, these personal abilities, you can learn it. You can learn it because maybe in some, if you have the jar very full, maybe not, but of course we can learn how to manage our emotions, our mind, to more protect and be more resilient. And I wish in the school, now what we talked about before, we learn about this, no? Because sure that prevention, look. I think that the prevention is very important, not only the treatment, no? And is sure that these personal abilities you can develop. It's not only, from my point of view, it's not only like you're born like this or not. Or maybe we will see if one day you can learn every place a lot of things of mental health, and then we have the same results. We will see, no? But maybe not. No. We have to try it.
No, it's absolutely clear the multifactorial nature, right? I think we had a lot more focus also on like the behavioral issues and things related to like substance and alcohol abuse, just because we could observe it. Now we are getting to understand many things that we didn't know before, from the social point of view and also from the microgenetic point of view. I think this has been a very good discussion, but let's take one more question. Is anybody? Yeah? No, two actually. Those last two. That's the last one.
Yeah, so I have a question for Tonina, and I apologize if this is a bit of a tricky question. But say we live 30 years in the future, we have gotten all this data on all the factors that affect the psychology of people, we have all the genetic data, and you get this migrant, but now you get the extra information that this person is 250% more likely to suffer depression, and only 30% as likely than most people to have an addiction. Could you use this information, and how would you use it?
All right, let's take the other question now, and then we'll answer both.
Okay. It's also for Tonina.
Right. That you're on the spotlight now.
Step by step. No, mine is regarding this prevention, because I usually or sometimes work with children. I made a lot of, here in Copenhagen, a lot of assessment, because sometimes school or the family is concerned about maybe a diagnosis or some doubts about the child. And I'm just, as you, I'm not a researcher, but all the children I had assessed, all are just not expat children, just expats in themselves. I mean, all of them have lived not just only in 2 countries, more, maybe 3, 4 countries. And they are 10, 11, 12 years old. So for me, that's crazy. I mean, they don't have this belonging feeling. They have no social support. They don't know who are their friends or the typical things that their culture is supposed to be. So I don't know if you have experience about that or you have just lived this experience, but it's because the parents, I mean, as Susanna said, sometimes this sounds like a great opportunity, a great challenge. But if you don't offer the child the correct support, it's prevention at the end. So that's if you have some opinion about that.
Okay, thank you for the questions. The first question, I understand. One moment in Spanish. ¿Quieres decir que si a mí me dijeran, ¿no? Genéticamente tú tienes esto, 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 ¿no? Vale. Okay. Then is one of part of information, very interesting and very useful, I think. But for me, wasn't only the only focus. Then I will have to study all the person in different aspects, no, big, and then valorate. This is the start point of inner personal work, no. From this point, then we will decide. This is like a play, no? You have some cards, and then okay, you have these cards. Then how we will play this game of life, no? And then we will decide with the person what his needs to be happier or to feel better with himself and this, and then we start to work on it, you know, in my part, that is the psychological, no? And then with a team, no? Because I think that the integral or multidisciplinary work is very important, no? Because his mind is body, is genetic. We are one, no? And then yes, we need to separate to understand, but then. Another dream would be like if you have a disease, then we work together from the genetic, from all this together. No, I answered the question. Yep. Thank you. For me, it's more information. No, for me, information to start. The point to start to travel and to learn more. And the second question. I don't have experience so young, but yes, of course, I think that all looks like it can be like good for the person and resilient and this, but sometimes the price is very hard, no? And when you are younger, you are more vulnerable. Vulnerable, look. And then you are more sensible, you don't have tools, you are not conscious about this, and then you are more exposed of all this, and if the people that don't protect you, don't give you tools, give you or acompañar, no? Because maybe he's not conscious, yes, of course that in the future maybe it would be more difficult for that children. Yes, I think that prevention in every field is more important, and because it's cheaper, not only for economy, but for all the suffering and all that is around this. Sorry for my English.
No worries. No, it was perfectly understood. And I think I'd like to wrap the discussion up just by sort of mention a few points we have talked about, right? I mean, we have learned about the genetic markers and how hopefully they will help us. But there's a lot that we don't know, right? I mean, for the time being, we just know a tiny pinch of it. We're making insights, right? Then on how to translate that and other kinds of information into useful, actionable techniques, drugs that can help us treat people from mental health issues. And then there's, again, so much that we don't know there, like which models are good and why is it that they're not good? Is there anything that we could do better? Can we do all together without animal models and animal testing? Hopefully, what are the ethical implications of that and of the genetics that we have talked about? And then from there to the social and behavioral aspect, and how does a clinician deal with all that? How does a clinician also use the information that comes from different stages of research, as a clinician may read results from animal models and genetics and may get an idea about how to use those things in some clinical practice, perhaps at their own risk of the clinician, you know, because those data are immature. There's so much that we don't know, and yet here we are, these experts, trying to put together and pile knowledge and evidence that matters, evidence that makes sure that we can safely help the people that need mental health services and products safely and evidence-based. And we're working hard to fill all of those knowledge gaps. And that is why mental health research matters. Thanks a lot. Let's get to breakfast. Sorry, lunch.